Chapter 2. When I first met Eric Dadjoff, he was thin, and his eyes were set back in his skull, rimmed in dark rings. His hair was overgrown and unkempt. His pants were dirty, and his hands shook. If I hadn't known why he was being taken into custody, I might have assumed it was drug-related. As it was, he had simply missed a court date on charge of vandalism. I walked up on the porch and knocked on the door. Eric said hello when he saw me, with none of the usual suspicion that normally greeted my presence. "Eric Dadjoff?" "Yes," he said. "I'll need you to come with me. You missed your court date, and I've been contracted to make sure you appear before the judge this afternoon." I turned so that he could see the weapon I had holstered on my hip. "Are you going to handcuff me?" "Should I?" "You may as well. That way my humiliation will be just about complete." We drove in relative silence for the first several blocks. It was not until we had left his neighborhood that he began loosening up. "I know you probably don't care, but I didn't skip court because I was trying to run." "That's pretty obvious," I said. "I assume you were just too embarrassed to go in. That happens a lot." "It just bothers me that I'm going to have to make restitution to that asshole." "You smashed his car window, right?" "Yep." "Then why shouldn't you have to make restitutions?" "Because I have no legal recourse to demand the restitutions he owes me." "Sure you do. I mean, if he destroyed something of yours—" "He destroyed everything of mine," Eric said as tears filled his sunken eyes. "He destroyed my life. He broke my future. So I broke his windshield. I shouldn't have to pay for that." "This is beginning to sound like a domestic—" "That's exactly what it is. Let me ask you something. If somebody stole your wife, wouldn't you feel justified in smashing his car window?" "I'd probably feel justified in smashing his knees, but the law— Of course the law, I understand that. But if I'm justified in smashing his window, shouldn't he just man up and pay for it?" "I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess so, but legally he had every right to turn you into the police." "He didn't turn me in. I did that." "Then how is it that you think he didn't man up?" "He said he was going to turn it into his insurance company. His policy doesn't even have a deductible if there's vandalism, so it wasn't going to cost him a dime. I waited until I thought he had turned it in, and then I went to the police and confessed. I told him that he knew it was me, and that he'd falsified his insurance claim." "So you accused him of insurance fraud? Good one." "Yeah, but he just denied knowing who it was who did it, and that made it my word against his." "Maybe he really didn't know it was you." "They watched me do it." "And they didn't report you to the police?" "No," he said, slinking back into the seat. "They made out like they didn't want to add to my problems, like they were being nice." The word nice hissed out of his mouth in a harsh whisper. "That just made it worse, didn't it?" I said. He sat up and leaned forward. "You get it," he said. "Of course I get that," I said. "You probably wanted to kill him, but you had the strength of character to channel it into simply smashing his windshield. That's commendable, except then it turns out that he turned it into his insurance and somebody else paid for it. Then you realized that in order for him to do that, he had to commit a felony, and you turned yourself in willing to pay your penalty just so he'd have to pay his, and nothing happened to him at all. There's no justice, no closure, no satisfaction." "Exactly," he said. He sat back again thinking. "Can I tell you something?" "I suppose so." "I want to kill him. I mean, I know I can't, and I told my therapist I don't have those kinds of feelings, but I do." "Why didn't you tell your therapist?" "She'd have to turn that in. They'd put me under surveillance." "So why are you telling me?" "Because you get it. I didn't say I was down with murder. You would be if you knew the whole story." He proceeded to tell me the whole story. He told me how his wife had grown up very close with her sister and mother in a home that was with an absent father, and how he had married her at a very young age, and they had started a family. He told me how his wife's sister had met and married a man twice her age, and how the four of them had spent most of their free time together. He told me how his wife's mother had died 2 years prior in a car accident, and how his wife and her brother-in-law had consoled each other while Eric was on the road making a living for his family. He told me how he had quit his lucrative job working as a cameraman for a documentary filmmaker to take a lower-paying job with a local television station because his wife had been complaining that he was never home. He told me how he had lost that job over an editorial disagreement and had been compelled to take a low-paying job as assistant manager at a bookstore. He told me how his wife had grown distant, and when he had made overtures to try to rekindle their romance, she had given him the cold shoulder. He told me about how, whenever they did talk, his wife had always steered the conversation to talk about her sister and to complain about what a bitch she was being. He told me about how his sister-in-law had developed epilepsy, and her husband had refused to have a child with her out of fear that the pregnancy would be dangerous. He told me about how his wife had begun complaining about their marriage to her cousins and friends, saying that he was the one who had become distant. He told me about how he had not bothered to defend himself, hoping that she would get over the funk he thought had been brought on by her mother's death, but now knew better. He told me about how whenever he had suggested that they have a date night, she had denied him, asserting money issues. He told me about how she had announced one week that she had decided to go out that weekend, leaving him alone with the baby while she had ladies' night with a girlfriend. He told me about how he had waited up that night, and when he heard his wife come home, she had not come upstairs, but had slept instead on the couch. He told me how the next morning he had gone to work and waited until almost noon to call home, and got no answer. He told me about how he had called the girlfriend his wife had gone out with the night previous to ask if she knew where his wife was. He told me that his wife had gotten on the phone and said they could talk later. He told me that he had asked if there was something wrong, and she'd said yes. He said he'd asked if she was leaving him, and she'd said yes. He said he'd asked if there was someone else, and he thought for sure she'd say no, but she didn't say no. She said yes. It was the brother-in-law, I said. Yeah, he said. I asked her all kinds of questions, and then I asked her if they'd had sex yet. She said they had. I asked her where, and she said in my living room. I asked when, and she said a few weeks ago when I was at work. I was at work, doing the job I'd been forced to take because she didn't want me to be on the road, and she screwed that fat, bald piece of shit in my living room while my son slept in his crib in the next room. And all you've done about it is smash a windshield? Now you know why I can't tell my therapist that I want him dead. End of chapter.